streaming on the web since 1996. This is Cinematic Sound.
Hey, this is Breaking the Waves, and I'm your host, Brandon-Shea Mutala, and we've got a very special episode for you tonight. I've let the listeners know that normally my podcast is going to be focusing on electronic film scores. However, I've also told you that I will change it up every once in a while, and here we are, episode 4, doing something different. We got a live interview for you with Canadian composer Jason Cullimore. How are you doing, Jason?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Excellent. So yeah, Jason and I, we've known each other for a couple of years. We actually got introduced to each other through a board gaming community here in town, here in Regina, Saskatchewan. And we were playing a lot of board games together. Jason knows about my love for train board games, train format board games. And we were playing a really neat game that was a Cthulhu board game we played a couple times. Tell me about that game.
Well, it's based on the Cthulhu mythos. It's a little bit like Risk, but each player controls a different faction, which is based on one of the monsters that's in the Cthulhu universe. And it's a fascinating game, and the artwork and the miniatures, they're actually quite big, and the sculpture is wonderful. Mm-hmm. So I like board games. I kind of like artworks when they're at their best.
Cthulhu Wars, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I remember the name of it now. It's been a while since we've played it, but
yeah.
Anyways, we're not here to talk about board games tonight. We're here to talk about music. And Jason, tell us a little bit about your CV, your resume here. Like, you've done a lot of composing. And before we get into your history, why don't you tell some of the listeners about some of the stuff that you've done?
Well, I've been a composer based in Regina, Saskatchewan here, it's in Canada, for, over 20 years. I've worked composing film scores, television scores. I've had concert music performed by symphony orchestras in Western Canada here. One of the biggest credits I've had is writing a new score for the classic 1920 silent film The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, a film from 1920, German Expressionist film, and it was a silent film, so I wrote a score, and we had live musicians performing the score in sync to a screening of the film, which is something we couldn't have done without having computer technology, keeping the musicians synced, having extra tracks of music playing, and then having it all synced to a digital projection of the film at the venue. One of the reasons I like this is because I've always used the computer in my compositional process. I wrote my first recorded music on a Commodore 64 back in the 1980s. And so I have a long history of using the computer as a means of expressing myself musically. Mm-hmm. So since now in the last 5 years or so, I've also been studying at the University of Regina. I'm doing my PhD in computer music, and I'm basically crossed between fine art and computer science there. And I'm using this program as a means to explore creativity in the context of how can a composer use a computer to extend their ability to communicate musically. Mm-hmm. And that research has become more and more important to me as I've gone through the PhD, and has involved a whole transformation of how I understand what the computer is in relation to the composer, for film, for video games, or just for new types of music altogether.
That's really interesting, because we're in a time right now where everything is changing when it comes to like television scoring and film scoring and stuff, and they're really pulling back from full symphony scores and whatnot, and everything's kind of going with a digital score or a computer generated score.
Yes.
And this is caused a lot of discussion and a lot of controversy in the community. You know, people seem to like and want to hold on to the old types of scoring, you know, the old traditional methods of scoring. But there's a lot of different composers that are coming up with new ways. Now, we're going to kind of be going all over the place in this discussion here, but I guess one of the first questions before we get too much into that is, with the music that you compose, like I was listening to a couple of your albums today again at work, and I'm blown away that you've composed this music on a computer, because I've heard some stuff that's been composed digitally, and I could tell that it doesn't sound like an instrument. Yet your stuff sounds like it's been recorded with a symphony, to the point where when I'm sitting listening to a symphony, there's like a little bit of like echo, like not echo, but you can hear the fullness of the room, and I'm hearing that in the music that I'm listening to of yours.
Exactly. Technology has improved immensely over the last 20 years, and one of the biggest factors in that is the idea of sampling. Sampling is where you take recordings of pre-existing pieces of music or sounds or anything and incorporate them into a performance, or into a, you know, you could take like audio files, put them in the computer and use them as part of your score. But what's happening today with computers and people who compose with computers is they've sort of extended the ability of sampling to the point where you can have a keyboard and use it just as an input device for the computer and play on the keyboard, and you can have it sound like an oboe or a violin or any sort of instrument, or even synthesizer, or even stuff that you've never heard before. That can all be produced in the computer because of the combination of sampling, you know. So you might say, if I want to have a very good solo violin sound, you know, a la, say, Schindler's List, there are dozens of companies that have produced sample libraries that contain solo violins that you can play on the keyboard, and to varying degrees they will sound more or less authentic. And the ones that sound most authentic will potentially fool people. So when I compose on a computer, what I'm doing is I'm conceiving of both the composition and the performance at the same time. And this is what a lot of composers do nowadays. When you use a computer, you can actually write a few notes and then hear them right back when you right after you've composed them. And if you have really good sample libraries, like a good string section, good brass, good woodwinds, all of this stuff, when you play it back, they're actually playing little snippets of actual recordings of, say, for the string section, the violins playing a melody that you can actually use to emulate the sound of an actual string section playing a melody. So the point is that, you know, there are so many options for getting sounds into your computer and then being able to write them as if you were composing a score and get the computer able to perform it using sounds that make it sound like a real performance. And I got my first sample library sort of like, you know, late 90s. You know, they'd started sampling orchestras at that time. It was a very early technology, so it didn't sound so accurate. But nowadays, as you listen to the new software that's coming up, they even have, like, for example, one of my favorite composers for film is Bernard Herrmann. There is a company who has sampled orchestral musicians performing samples, or he's performing raw material that when you program it properly, it sounds like the instrumentation choices that Bernard Herrmann would use. I haven't got that one myself, but I've heard the demos, and it's only a matter of time. I'm going to get that at some point, because and what they've done is they've sort of tried to capture the different arrangements and things that Bernard Herrmann used in his famous scores for, say, Hitchcock, you know?
So what do you mean when they say they've sampled this? Do they just go down, do they sit down with one violinist and they say, okay, play this note like this? So they play the note and record it. And then they go to the next one and play this note like this. Is that what they're doing?
What they're doing is sampling. So you got two things. You've got like the actual performance of the pitch of the note, and then you've got the articulation, which is the style. So, for example, if I was going to sample a solo violin, I would start recording every single pitch that violin can play within its range, and I'd record the player, say, if I wanted just sort of like smooth, legato playing, I might just record sustained notes, right? And so when that's compiled and put into a sampler, you can actually say when you press the note C, C4, for example, on your MIDI keyboard, the computer says, I'm supposed to play the sample of the violin playing C4. So I press that and I hear C4. And if they've sampled all these other these other pitches for that instrument, I can play, C4 and then C5 and then G4. I can play any sequence of notes. But what the sound that comes out is the sound of somebody actually playing those violin notes. Okay. But you can do more than that. As we've had more memory in our computers, as we've had more complex scripting for these libraries, you can actually do things like, for example, say I'm playing a section of sustained notes and I think I want some pizzicato, plucked sounds on the violin. The sampler could record all these plucked sounds as well. And then this is called articulations, different ways or techniques of playing the instrument. And the thing is, the more articulations you have in the instrument, the more options you have for varying the sound. And if you add to that the fact that these samplers are not just playing back samples, but they're also have a scripting system usually that allows you to do transformations, like maybe create a smooth crossfade between a very loud sound on a sustained violin note to a soft sound, and the computer can actually calculate, okay, how would a real violin behave in this situation? And then so that once you reduce the volume of the note, say like with one of the mod wheel, for example, on your computer keyboard, it can actually make a realistic emulation of what it would sound like if you were playing a sustained violin note, starting at one loudness and then slowly bringing it down, which is something you can't really do on the piano, because the piano really, the keyboard, which you connect like a piano-like keyboard that you connect to your computer to play these things, it's it's basically good at on and off, right? But with the scripting, you can actually have interesting things happen. And this has been So what we've had is we've gone from just recording simple multi-samples of we've got notes across the keyboard where each one is a different pitch of the note, to something where you can use elaborate programming interface to actually make the instrument sing, because you're able to select articulations on the fly. You're able to change how the sound is expressed using sort of variables. Automation is what we call it. And the thing is, as the technology gets more and more defined and as the technology gets more and more developed, what we find is that the computer becomes more and more like a musical instrument in itself. Yes, you can record melodies and stuff, but you can also play it. And when I compose music using my computer, it's very improvisationary. I'm actually sitting there and I'm playing themes and melodies, and sometimes, you can get something playing on the computer, sort of like the piano-like keyboard that I use to enter notes. I can get something that sounds like a Paganini violin run or something like that. I mean, that's what can happen, right? So the point is that the technology gets more and more complicated, and as that happens, people who really embrace this technology and start to use it creatively find that they have all of this wonderful ability to emulate an orchestra and to emulate or even a jazz orchestra or a small combo, chamber ensemble, choir. All this stuff is available now. And so for composers for film, I mean, if you really take the time and try to learn how this technology works, and also develop your own artistic personality, your ability to express yourself through it, what you find is that this computer technology becomes less like sort of a calculating machine and more like a site where you can be creative and self-expressive. And that's the best thing I think about all this new computer technology, is it's allowing people who use it to express themselves artistically, and aesthetically in ways that they wouldn't have before computers actually got this capable, right? So it's a big deal every time a new sample library comes out or a new scripting system. And for my, and I'll talk later about this, but you also, with computers, you get to a point where you don't just tell it what to do, but it can think for itself if you're actually programming it, and that's where my own research is taking me now.
Okay. Well, before we get into that, there's so many questions that I want to ask, and I hope I don't forget some of them here. But I mean, so with the sample library that you're talking about, like, is it a trade secret? Can you tell me, like, what companies release the good quality stuff that you use?
Absolutely.
What programs do you use? And I'm going to ask a couple in a row to hopefully you get together. And when you're also recording and writing stuff on your computer, do you do it like one instrument at a time, or like how does that all work?
Sure, I can explain all of that. So I use a program called Cubase as my composing environment. There are a number of them, but Cubase can be thought of in sort of basic terms. It's like a word processor for musical scores. So when I interact with Cubase, what I'm doing is I'm putting notes into a score. It looks more like an old-time piano roll from Player Pianos than it looks like a score, although there is computer software that actually you work with what looks like a score that people would use to perform from if they're in a concert setting. But I use Cubase, and so what I'm doing is basically loading up Cubase, loading up a palette of sounds that I want to use. So let's say I'm going to write a string quartet. So I'll load up a track with a cello, a track with a viola, and a track with 2 violins. And then they're sitting there on the screen, and I'm looking at the. So I've got 4 tracks, one for each instrument, and then I've loaded up sounds that are, samples of these instruments, and then it becomes for me like an improvisation. If I'm starting a piece from scratch and I have no expectations, which is a really good place to be with this, I might think, how do I feel today? What do I feel like writing? And maybe I feel like writing a beautiful sort of pastoral piece, So what I could do is I could go to the violin track and I could open it up and I could just sort of start on the keyboard playing around with that violin sound. So I might play some little melodies or motifs, or I might sort of think about that, and I hit upon something that I like. And the thing is, everything you play can be recorded by this thing. It's sort of like, it's producing it digitally, the sounds that you're working with. So as you play, you can record what you're playing, and if you like something that you play, you can actually sort of take it and make it part of the piece. So I've written the first violin part, and I think, well, maybe the viola should come in here, maybe make it like a fugue or something like that. So I bring the viola in sort of later, and I sort of play another melody or a counter melody, whatever I end up choosing it to be. And it's a really wonderful experience because you're sitting there thinking, okay, I want to write a string quartet, and instead of sort of trying to imagine what it sounds like, the computer actually gives you a place where you can play with the ideas, play with the musical ideas. And sort of start to think about what inspires you, right? It's liberating, Whereas if you look back, say Beethoven's writing a string quartet, he's got a quill and a piano, and I think in his early string quartets he was able to hear because of course he went deaf. But for a composer of that era, you're actually you might work out your themes at the piano, you might work them out in your head, and there's a lot of skill that's involved in that, but it's a different way of approaching composing. So for them, it's a very cerebral, sort of memory-intensive process. But for modern composers today who use the computer, it's not a worse process, it's not a better process, but it's one where you have sort of a stronger interaction with the score itself, because you're using the computer as a site to workshop the score as you compose. And as you fill out the notes, say I've written like 8 bars, for example, I can play them back and I can listen, and it sounds sort of like what I might expect a string quartet to play it would sound like. And I can think, okay, well, that theme works great, but I don't like the harmony I have here, so I can edit it because all of this is editable. And I can think, well, yeah, but it's dragging a bit, and so I can increase the tempo, And then I might think to myself, well, maybe this isn't a pastoral piece. Maybe this is something that's darker and more ominous. And so I can start changing the key of the piece. I can bring it down in height. I might change it from a major to a minor key. I mean, all of these things are possible because you actually, and this is one of the things I've learned in my research as a PhD student. The computer is a place where you externalize some of the processes that you undertake to create whatever you're creating with the computer. Like I have a good musical memory, I have good musical imagery, but I can actually also work with the computer, because the computer can like externalize my musical memory. It can externalize the musical imagery by being able to play things back independently of my own mind, right? This is what makes the computer such an incredibly transformative tool, and one of the reasons why the music world, whether film music or otherwise, is in sort of a state of transformation right now, because the computer it's not like Beethoven's quill, it's not like Stravinsky's piano. It's a different entity completely. It has a memory. It can make decisions, and when you work with a program like Cubase, or any of these sequencers or notation software, you're actually working not just based on what you want to do, but on the way the designers of the code or the software have sort of imagined that you want to work. So if I'm writing in Cubase, there's an influence of the designers of Cubase. Whereas if I was working in Logic or Ableton Live, the designers of those programs would have a huge impact on how I realize my thought. How I realize the music, and how I think about the music as I design it. And I've written some music, a little bit of music in Ableton for my thesis, because I use that in my research. And it's a whole different environment, and it changes how you think about music, you know? This isn't new. I mean, composers who worked out their melodies on a piano tend to have a different style, even back in the 19th century, for example. A composer who worked at the piano tended to have a different process and a different relationship with composition and music than a composer who worked just worked on creating themes in their head, or creating them with a violin if they were a virtuoso violinist like Paganini. So the thing is, the tools you use affect how you express yourself when you're an artist, and that includes composers. And I've become acutely aware of that, and that's why when film composers, like, there's a lot of communities online of people who are very interested in virtual instruments, sampled instruments, computer music, they realize that we're opening up new doors to self-expression, and that is what's really special about today, this point in history, is that, I mean, maybe in the future computers will compose all of the music for us. That may happen. I think, it would be a poorer world for that. But right now we're sort of at this borderline, this point where the computer technology is just good enough to give artists and composers the opportunity to do some fundamentally new things. And that's why today is so exciting. We've sort of got to the point where the computers can be partners in creation, but we're before the point where computers are programmed to take creativity out of our hands. I hope it never gets to that point, but I can't predict the future. Okay.
So you've talked a lot about the benefits that this program, this type of computer composition can give you, but what are some of the limitations?
Well, think about it this way. Let's take Mozart. Mozart had a quill, and he had score paper, and he had his ability to play on a number of instruments, right? Everything he did required him to become skilled with things, right? One of the things that we know today is that the computer can serve as an externalized site where you can externalize aspects of your compositional, creative, or your mental processes related to crafting music, right? So the computer can serve as your memory. It can externalize your memory. I can remember pieces that I wrote 10 years ago because I can bring them up as like audio files, or even open up my old Cubase programs. So in a sense, what the computer has done is it's actually taken my human memory and said, I'm going to augment that. I'm going to extend it by allowing you to store things externally to yourself so that you can bring them back up, right? This is the idea that technology extends human capacities. It's not just like a hammer. Like a hammer extends the arm and allows you to hammer in a nail. You couldn't hammer in a nail with your hand, with your fist. You damage your fist. But you place a hammer in your hand, and you can actually nail a nail down. You can hammer it down. All you're doing is just extending the strength and basically it's extending the strength of your arm, right? That's what a hammer is. Eyeglasses, for example, they extend the ability of your eye to focus and to see detail, right? So technologies extend our ability. But what happens when you have a computer is it extends abilities that maybe, couldn't be extended by a sort of a simple tool like a hammer or the lenses of your eyeglasses. A computer can actually remember things for you. It can play back things for you. So what it does is it actually, I'm not going to say it makes it easier to be a composer, because you still have to have a spark of creativity. You still have to have something to say with your music. That is something that a computer program, I don't think, would be able to externalize very easily. But when you work with a computer, it gives you the ability to externalize memory, to be able to do things that you might not be able to do if you were just sitting at a desk with a quill. That doesn't mean the music is any worse or any better. It just means that your relationship with the computer becomes more significant than it would have been for the relationship, say, between Mozart and the quill that he used to write his symphonies, right? So one of the most exciting things about today for composers, there's so many of us, you know, because a lot of us started out, you know, especially the younger generations, they started out with programs like GarageBand, you know, Band in a Box was an earlier one, you know, things where they made it sort of easier to get started in music. And so there's, I heard a statistic recently that there's more composers alive today than have passed in all the previous generations of composers of Western art music, right? So that's a wonderful thing, because the bar for composing, you know, for what you have to do is coming down. And I believe very firmly that even it's not easier to compose. It's easier to learn the tools you need to compose, but to compose also is something where you have to express yourself, right? And you have to have something to say, and you have to have something that connects with people. That takes a lifetime. That's a lifetime's work. But for a lot of people today, you know, it's possible to go to GarageBand or Ableton or any of number of these programs and actually be able to produce something that sounds interesting to them. And that's kind of the role that the Commodore 64 played for me. Before the Commodore 64, I had improvised on a computer keyboard, but I couldn't remember everything that I'd improvised. It was just sort of like a fun thing to do. When I first got the music software for my Commodore 64, I was able to record ideas, and I could play them back, you know, 5 days later, and I could say, oh, that was really good, you know. So I had externalized some of my musical memory in a sense, and the computer was able to serve as a site where I could build stuff up. And then after that, you know, I realized, it was basically with the Commodore 64 that I realized I really wanted to be a composer and somebody who worked with music, you know, because it was just such a rich experience, and I was able to record things. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. But I'll get back to the question again. So, like, again, you're talking about all the benefits and whatnot of this, but is there any way that it limits you where working with
of course.
pen and paper?
Here's the thing: it does limit you as well, right? So look at loops, for example. Those are sampled. Those are samples of, say, a drum kit or even a whole band playing like a segment of sound. One of the great things that worries me about this is an artist. And I include composers. Composers are artists. An artist has to be able to communicate fully and completely, right? So we've got all this technology, and it says, you know, oh, you don't know how to program a drum pattern? Oh, the computer will do it. Or you don't know, you know, how to convert this passage you've written from a major scale to a whole tone scale? Oh, the computer will do it, right? When the computer takes choices and makes them too easy, or even takes choices out of the hands of the composer, what you end up having is less control. And I believe that there's a point which you reach where the computer is doing so much for you that it's not really necessary for you to even be part of the process. There's some apps that you can get for your iPhone or your Android phone, for example, that allow you to tap the screen and you can make this beautiful music, right? And I've played with apps like that. There's a number of them on the App Store right now. And so you're tapping the screen and you're making this music, and it's beautiful. And you know, you think, wow, I've just made something beautiful. Have you really? This is the question. Have you really made something beautiful? Or have you just interacted with something that has all the power it needs to make something beautiful, and you're just giving it, is basically turning it on, right? So this is the thing. Like, computers and the thing is, the designers of those apps, then the programmers, then have a lot of power, right? They are able to design an environment, for example, where you tap the screen in different places, and it always creates this beautiful, tranquil theme, right? Well, okay, I take that back in time and I give it to Mozart, and I say, okay, here's this high-tech instrument that we've got on this technology called a cell phone. Mozart, you're one of the greatest composers of Western classical music. What can you do with this? Well, Mozart, would probably, I'm guessing, would tap it. He'd be amazed that he could make these sounds, but he'd immediately realize, oh, but I feel like writing a requiem, Can I do that with this? And he's tapping on the screen. It doesn't go anywhere close to a requiem. It just creates beautiful, tranquil music. So there has to be a balance between sort of the ability to allow for exploration and at the same time helping people to sort of externalize aspects of their creative process, right?
Okay.
And the thing is, sometimes it goes too far. And that's where I think there's a problem. So you get programs that allow you to string together loops. That's different from writing the loops yourself. And if you're using a software environment which allows you to take a little bit of pre-composed music from point A, a little bit from B, here you put them together, it raises a question. Are you a composer, or are you just assembling a musical jigsaw puzzle that somebody else actually made? And this is the scary thing about computer music. I mentioned, I always feel like, how much humanity is in computer music. There can be a lot of it, but it can also remove a lot from it, And I think music is at its best, and I feel this in my own expressive, my own music, is it's at its best when I'm emoting through it, when I'm expressing something that is uniquely me, right? And computers, technology can help you to do that amazingly well. I could write a symphony, and it would be purely me. At the same time, there are a lot of programmers who are coming up with approaches that take so much away from that process and make it so, quote-unquote, easy to engage with, that one might be fooled into thinking that they're expressing themselves, when really they're just expressing what the programmer intended. And that's a key issue in my thesis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, as a composer, you compose everything digitally. We're in an age where everything is digital, everything's available on the computer and whatnot. And I was upstairs, a couple months ago, and I was sitting in my living room, and I'm like, I want to listen to my Boards of Canada album. Boards of Canada is one of my favorite bands.
Yeah. I
don't want to walk all the way downstairs and get my CD, so I turn on YouTube, right? I'm listening to the Boards of Canada album on YouTube, and after I listen to a bit of it, it comes up with a pop-up that says, now check out this, and I listened to a band called Tycho, and I discovered this band called Tycho, and this amazing album his album Dive has now become one of my favorite albums of all time.
Yeah.
And, with sharing things online and sharing things digitally, like, technically, this is kind of illegal to share this stuff on YouTube, but because of this, I've discovered an artist that I would never have discovered on my own.
Yeah.
So as a person who composes stuff digitally, how do you feel about sharing things like YouTube and stuff like this where they can share music?
I think it's first of all, it's not going away. I mean, this is the new environment we find ourselves in, and I don't know how long we're going to be so tied to the internet and social media and sharing and all of this. I mean, that seems to be the biggest shift that the computer technology has brought to human society, right? We're all completely connected with one another now. I can listen to somebody blogging on the opposite side of the planet, and I can be influenced by that. So when I look at technology now, I think that there's a lot of questions about what the impact of technology will have, and it goes far beyond just like music technology. Tycho probably didn't get paid paid enough to make it worth his while when you listen to his music on YouTube. Yet you made an artistic connection, right? Right. You listen to his music, and I know that album, The Dive. It's gorgeous, And the thing is, I think we have to change how we think about what technology means and what being an artist means. I mean, art to me, and this is just my opinion, it's a form of communication, and art is only fully realized when it's shared, right? So if there's an artist who has some music up on YouTube, and then from that you go down the chain and you find 5 new artists who you think that's amazing, then that's a success in a way. It's a real success in a way because it's allowed these other artists who before that you hadn't heard of, it allows them to sort of complete the artistic process, which is send something out into the world and have it appreciated, right? Mm-hmm. On the other hand, there's the economic factor. Nobody really knows how to monetize the internet yet. I mean, you heard stories like in terms of art, right? There's a lot of people trying a lot of different things. Some of them have success. Most of us don't, right? Mm-hmm. Because the technology is new to us, and we don't know how it works, and it hasn't even really finished developing, right? Mm-hmm. So the thing is, in the end, we need to eat, and we need to have shelter, and we need to make money to do that, right? And so, with the sort of the social networking, you have to be creative as an artist to figure out how you're going to make money off of that, because there's lots of sites, where you can go and put your music up and sell it, but there's this whole mass of people who are doing exactly the same thing. And sometimes, in my opinion, it's just me, but sometimes, in my opinion, what rises to the top isn't necessarily the stuff that is the best, right? Mm-hmm. And what is the best anyway? So it used to be like when you had the record labels and you had gatekeepers that you had to pass through to get to the point where you could share your music widely. That was an imperfect system too, but it was a different system, and there was a clear goal, right? Mm-hmm. But with things going viral these days, and people using their creativity to come up with ways to use the internet as in new ways as a site to promote themselves, like that's a creative act too. I mean, just getting noticed is often done by creating something that goes viral, right? That's one path to making money and sustaining yourself on the internet, and that requires creativity too. It's a different type of creativity from just composing linear music, but it's one that rewards those who are willing to take a risk or to think differently, and because there's so many composers out there these days, that's part of like finding how to get your stuff out to that market of people who are going to appreciate it and complete the process of creating and transmitting art. That is really a place where creativity is demanded as well. Mm-hmm. And social media is changing, the internet is changing. It's everything is in flux, and so it's kind of a time where there aren't simple answers. Like back in the 70s, if you want to be a rock star, you had to go through the labels. You had to go through record labels, managers. You had to build up to it, right? In the classical era, you might find a patron. I mean, like Tchaikovsky had a patron. Mm-hmm. She provided all the funds he needed, and he was able to compose, and that gave him the freedom to be able to compose. It's a different model every time. And so now we have things like, I think there's a site called Patreon, where you can actually, people can subscribe to you, and you can actually, for example, release an album every 2 months or whatever you can do, and they will pay for a subscription to that. That's another attempt. Or like eBay, people try to monetize eBay, make little cottage industries. That could be applied to art too. There's no one way anymore, and the fact is that anyone on this planet who has a cell phone or an internet access, they can reach anyone else who has some form of internet access. And creativity in the business side of being an artist is similar to being creative in the artistic side. It's that you have to use the technology in original ways and find a way to achieve your goal, which in this case is to connect and monetize. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Now, moving on here. So you're working on your thesis right now, but you also teach at the University of Regina. Mm-hmm. What type of classes do you teach?
I've taught 2 classes over my time at the University of Regina. One was at Luther College. I taught a psychology of music course. I did that for 3 years. And that was my master's degree was in the psychology of music. So I looked at how the brain, how the science surrounding how we understand what the brain does. I looked at how that can sort of allow us to understand what music is and how music affects us and why music affects us, and that was a really fun course to teach because I mean, people think of music, we have all these cultural notions of what a composer is, what a celebrity musician is, all this stuff, and music psychologists, in the field of music psychology, they're all looking at these same questions. Why do we like the music we like? Why does one particular sort of instrument have a different impact on us when it plays the same melody as another one? This is the thing. So I taught that class, and actually reteaching it, teaching it because it was based on my master's degree, it really opened my eyes to once more to just how deeply and richly music is ingrained within us, right? And my goal with that course, the overarching goal was just to show how amazingly complex and beautiful the human relationship with music is. More recently, I've taught a course in music and the computer. I've taught that once so far, and it really deals with sort of what I'm talking about today. How does music technology change how we understand music? And the overriding question in that class was, what will music be like 100 years from now? There's no definite answer, but if you look at what's happening with technology today and what happened with technology in the past, you can you can sort of extrapolate to a future, and you can try and sort of say, this is, you can sort of say to yourself, this is what music will become, and in a time when music is evolving rapidly, I think it's important to consider that, because the technology I used to make music when I was sort of in my late teens, early 20s, the students in that class, it's a different world now, and different technologies. So trying to find some thread that sort of ties the changing structure of music together is important. Yeah, so I've taught those two classes. I've given a number of guest lectures and things in other classes about video game music, for example, or about how interactive music has the potential to transform how we experience music. This is all because it's at a time in history where things are in flux and they're unstable, and at the same time they're growing and developing rapidly.
So what can you tell us about your thesis that you're working on right now? Well,
my thesis is based on the idea, it's an interdisciplinary thesis, first of all. I'm working...
What does interdisciplinary mean?
Interdisciplinary means you draw ideas, approaches, language, and research resources from more than one domain, like discipline. So, for example, you could say that composition could be considered, the study of composition, the creation of composition could be a discipline. It's a focused area where it has a sort of a semi-singular history. You can trace it back. It's kind of its own thing. Likewise, you could say that computer science might be a discipline. It has a common history. There's key research areas that are drawn upon by most researchers in that field. And interdisciplinary researchers and interdisciplinary artists are individuals who bring together one or two or more of these disciplines together. And I'm actually in 3 disciplines, I feel. I'm in computer science. I'm actually... For my program, I'm in the computer science department. I'm also in the fine arts department, what's now known as the faculty of media, art, and performance, but it was the fine arts faculty at the University of Regina. And then, because I have a master's in music psychology, which is helping me immensely as I sort of work to translate, my own musical tendencies and interests and sort of impart that to computer technology, I'm very close to music psychology and psychology as a discipline as well. So that's what interdisciplinarity means. And for me, what it allows me to do is to explore areas that are sort of outside of the standard domains where we might conduct research, right? what happens when you bring together, say, a mathematician and a dancer? They have different languages, different objectives, they have different values. You bring them together. If they work together, dancing about math, it's something people haven't done. For example, it incites new ideas, and that's the great benefit of interdisciplinarity, right? So with my research, I'm taking technical, almost like an engineering approach in computer science. I'm taking this approach from my previous compositional practice, which has been ongoing, and my knowledge of psychology of music, and I'm saying, okay, when we combine these three disciplines, what do we find in that borderland? And that borderland is where I'm creating my own research and art. It's the idea of automation of compositional processes, the idea of using the computer as a site of musical creativity, not just for the composer, but for the audience, and also for the programmer. I believe very strongly that when a programmer embraces the creation of music through programming code, they become an artist, just as they would if they design software that, say, paints a picture, you know? And as we go forward in academia, these boundaries between different disciplines are sort of coming down a bit, because we're realizing that there's points of contact between psychology and music, or computer science and dance. I mean, all these things. This is a way we can grow as researchers. We can fight this stagnation that has been that always threatens an art form, or a discipline. There's always a sense that you're going to reach a point where you've covered as much and you're struggling to find new questions. Well, an interdisciplinary approach is a way of generating new questions, and that's enriching for artists and for researchers.
Excellent. Right on. Sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
Now, I want to ask you a bit about some of your work that you've done here. And the first one I want to ask about, because I find it the most fascinating, is how did you get involved with this Dr. Caligari film, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari?
Well, connections. I had worked with a number of the people who were organizing the event at the beginning, and we were working together, and we were trying to imagine what we could do with German Expressionist film, theater, art, all of that stuff. And they were thinking of having a big exhibition of sort of German Expressionist art tied in with the local arts community here, who are amazing. In Regina and Saskatchewan, we have an amazing arts community. And the idea was to see how local artists would respond to this rich and sort of vibrant, artistic era, So I was meeting with them, and they talked about, maybe we could have some music that I could write that would be based on, one of the German Expressionist films. And so we were talking about The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and a bunch of us got together at my place, and we sat down and we watched it. It's a silent film, and we thought, okay, that's a cool film, because it was made in 1920. It's one of the first, maybe the first horror film, a silent film. We listened to it with there was somebody had put a little bit of music in there. We turned that off. We just watched it silent, and we saw it. And I was completely inspired by it, because it was dark and brooding and funny too. It had humorous elements, and it had a real twist at the end. In fact, I read somewhere that it was one of the first twist endings in Hollywood history, right? So we thought, well, what can we do with this? Like, it doesn't have a score. I mean, there was no score written originally. It was a silent film. And I thought, well, I looked back and I thought my first orchestral performance was of a score that I had written for a scene from another silent film, called Steamboat Bill Jr. It had Buster Keaton as its lead, and my first ever performance by a live orchestra, I think it was about 2007. I went to Victoria and was part of this program they had called Real Music, where they had 2 clips, and then 4 of us different composers scored each clip, and so they had 8 performances. It was like a little competition thing, but really it was a celebration of how different composers would approach scoring a classic film like Steamboat Bill Jr. And that was my first orchestral performance, and it was a film score, and they actually projected the film above the orchestra. So we thought, well, maybe we could do something like that with Caligari. But Caligari is a 70-minute film. I mean, it's ambitious, you know. And so we thought about it, and I started doing some test writing. And so I got a copy of the film, and I started, I put it in my composing environment. I started playing along with it, and I realized that film was inspiring to me.
Okay.
So as we developed, it sort of went, but it was inspiring. But we didn't want to just have a screening of a film with a synthesized or sampled score. We wanted to have a performance, and the only way we could really do a performance that would be worthy of a concert hall, would be to have live instruments there, because they bring so much. And so we decided to hire a number of musicians, and we had an instrumentation, and I worked on the score on that basis in Cubase, as I've mentioned before. In Cubase, and as I would play the ideas that I had written in Cubase using sampled instruments, I would hear it, and I would see the video of the Caligari movie playing along with it, and so I workshopped it kind of there. And we got some fantastic local musicians. My goodness, they were so dedicated, and we had a lot of rehearsals, because this is one of the things when a conductor conducts a piece of like a symphony, for example, it's not rigid in time. The conductor, counts time, but there's always room for interpretation in that. So what happened was, as we we want the film to actually sync up with the performance of the musicians, and so we found ways to do that technically. And by the time we had the actual performance, it was a thing where the musicians knew to follow the conductor. The conductor was following a click track and the score on the screen, and they played it almost note perfect on the night of the performance, and it was incredible.
Cool.
Yeah. And something that couldn't have happened in that way without computer technology, both in the writing and also in the presentation, because the computer was sending the soundtrack. Was actually, musicians were playing along with some additional sounds that I had recorded. The click track, which is a way of keeping time, was also sent off the computer, and the computer was also sending a digital copy of the film screening in sync to everything else. So the fact that it all worked and came together at the end was one of the proudest moments of my musical career.
See, I went to, it must have been 2002.
Yeah.
There was a pipe organ festival in Calgary.
Wow.
And they had a live screening of Metropolis on film, and so I went, and they were playing this pipe organ music live to the movie, and they also had a theremin there too, which was really cool. So during an intermission, they had the theremin out, so I got to play the theremin for a little bit. It was really neat.
Nice.
But like this is something that's becoming more popular right now as well, which is this projecting a movie and having a film score performed live.
Yeah.
We're not getting that in Regina because I think we're a little too small, but
We've had it. It's actually, the Regina Symphony Orchestra has done that several times.
Have they?
They have.
Oh,
yeah, you
my
should look
goodness.
out for it. I know Victor Sawa, who is the former conductor, he was a real big supporter of that. He actually conducted the Caligari project that I was involved in, and Victor Sawa is a big film buff, and so he made sure there was always something cinematic in every season of the Regina Symphony Orchestra. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to the first part of my interview with Jason Cullimore. Part 2 will be coming very shortly, and we'll be talking more about some more of his music in the second part of the interview. So we'll leave you tonight with a few tracks composed by Jason Cullimore. I really hope you like the show so far. I really hope you like listening to him and I have this one-on-one conversation that we had in my basement just a little while ago. Yeah, it was a heck of a lot of fun, and I'm happy to be sharing it with you. So please check out his work at jasoncullimore.com. He's got a SoundCloud page and everything like that, so be sure to check him out and take a listen to his music. He's a very, very talented musician. So I leave you today with some music from Jason Cullimore, and I'll be back very soon with part 2.
you for listening to Cinematic Sound Radio. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please email us at cinematicsound@yahoo.com. Don't forget to check us out at Cinematic Sound Radio at cinematicsound.net on the web, Cinsound Radio on Twitter, and Cinematic Sound on Facebook. And if you listen to us on iTunes, why don't you take a moment right now and rate the show and write a brief review. All reviews help us get noticed on iTunes. And don't forget to tell all your friends about the program as well. Share this show on your favorite social media network. We really appreciate all the support. And don't forget to check out our affiliate at WRock Radio at wrockradio.com.